Let us pray. As we gather here this morning, oh God, help us to keep our hearts open to your word, that we might have a greater understanding for your call in our lives. In your name we pray, amen. When news such as what we've had this week, with Gail's unexpected passing, not only are we grieving, caring for Ted and his family, and receiving care from you as well, but it causes us to reflect on our own lives, our own mortality, and the fragile gift of life, and the reality that living life to the fullest matters, making every moment count. Recognizing that when our days on earth are over, the legacy that we have left behind is one that has made a positive change. And the words we just heard in our gospel story, "With you I am well pleased," meet us with our last breath. With you I am well pleased. I am sure that is what God has said when he welcomed Gail. We've just unpacked the holidays and put them away, except for some of the music, which I'm so grateful for, that still has that essence of Christmas continuing, because it's important for all of us, the story, the wonder, the magic that's there, the strength that it gives to us, and the hope that it always offers us. The big build-up, though, the enjoyment with family and friends, and perhaps the traveling to and from places to be together, they're over. And maybe that finds us a little bit tired and worn out and maybe a little bit down. You know, there's this build-up and then there's this letdown. As we regroup with what's next in our lives, and this unusual weather, you know, doesn't help with the heaviness and the rain outside. Well, there's a scene I want to share with you from the movie Finding Elmo. Maybe some of you have seen that. Finding Elmo. At the very end, after the credits, there's a part of the story that goes on. See, the heart of the story is already over. After a harrowing journey across the sea, Marlin, the father clownfish, finds Nemo. They are reunited, his son, who had been missing and taken originally from the Great Barrier Reef and then ended up in a dentist's office in a fish tank in Sydney. You might remember the story. And at the very end of this, he gets out. He escapes. And all lived happily ever after, right? The end. Well, not quite. You see, for although the main story has ended, we soon discover that another story is just beginning. You see, the fish in the fish tank with Nemo, who had helped him escape, they've managed to set themselves free too. While their tank was being cleaned, they were all in these little individual plastic bags. If you might have seen it or remember it and you think about it in your mind, they're all in these little bags, and they managed to get the bags to roll across the counter, out the window, down across the street, into the Sydney harbor. And when the last one finally reaches the water, there is this collective cheer and a sigh of relief. And then the reality of their situation dawns upon them, bobbing in the ocean, still encased in their little thin plastic bags. Bloke, the pufferfish, breaks the silence with these words, "Now what?" Now what? That is the question for today. Now what? The great drama of Advent and Christmas are over. We are reeling from the deep loss that we are all feeling from one we have loved so deeply and who's loved us, who has shown us kindness in action, who has left us with a legacy of goodness and love. Now what? The Christian calendar swiftly moves us from Christmas to Jesus' baptism, which we just heard about in our reading this morning. We're ushered into a scene down by the River Jordan, where Jesus approaches his cousin, John the Baptist, and asked to be baptized by him. John was calling people out to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. And Jesus comes and says, "Baptize me." The water in the River Jordan is not something you might really want to put yourself in. It's murky, and you would think that you would not really come out cleansed, at least maybe in body, but in spirit. And that's what the story is about. The cleansing of heart. That is the what now we've asked, or the now what. A centering of our hearts on what is most important in life. And true to everything that surrounds God's love and the stories that we read in the gospel, Jesus' baptism is no ordinary one. While others too are being baptized, the story tells us that when Jesus comes up out of the water, he sees a dove descending upon him. And he hears the words, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." Now, it's fascinating, just to give you a little background, the other three Gospels, I know there are four Gospels, but there's the Gospel of John doesn't take on the baptism of Jesus, but the other Gospels do. And they tell the story a little bit differently as to whether Jesus just heard those words himself, or maybe the crowd heard them, and it was something that they were all opened up to in their hearts to hear. But the point of the story here today is that Jesus, as he comes out of the water, is aware of the incredible presence of God. "This is my son with whom I am well pleased," a defining moment in his life, a moment of belonging. Belonging. Yes, that's it. The answer to now what? Belonging. It's giving ourselves over to the power of love and belonging to a force greater than ourselves that comes from that love. And that magnifies that love through our living. Whether it is through the church rite of a formal baptism with water, or perhaps it's a moment in our lives when we say yes to embracing a life that values all others, that believes love can bring positive change, and acting in that love in all that we say and do. A life that seeks peace and harmony, that works towards justice and kindness. A life that is compassionate and finds completeness in the awareness that we are a part of a greater reality of light, of love, and of promise. We are part of that. Belonging. Anytime we make such a choice to embrace God's presence in our lives and turn toward God's love as a model for our living, we are washed over with the outpouring of the Spirit. And in so doing, we are drawn into community with God and one another so closely that we become family. We are family. God's children. Children of love, in whom God is well pleased. And so it is when you and I turn toward living in love. When we make that conscious effort. When we stop and say in the middle of our living, "Now what?" as we face heartache and struggle and yearn to live more completely. We hear the voice that says, "You are my beloved. You are. You, and you. We all are. And in you," God says, "I see endless possibilities. With you, I see great potential. With you, I am well pleased." And it is not because we do everything right, but because we have made a commitment to do our best. No matter what our age may be, God's fundamental attitude toward us is, as the Gospel of Mark records, delight. God delights in us. As a parent delights in a child, delights in us because we have responded yes to following the ways of love. And having the Spirit of God in him, Jesus had the power to fight the demons, to fight the evil power and forces that were around him, the negativity in the world, to face the challenges that would lie ahead. That same Spirit lives in our hearts. And that same Spirit gives us power and gentleness to meet our daily challenges and stand firm on the principles of love and of peace. In closing, there's a story I want to share with you about a pastor who volunteered at a homeless shelter. It was run by a mission, and there would always be a little worship service before the meal was to be served. And the preacher that evening had recited when he was in high school the Kipling poem, If, and he decided to share it with those gathered there that evening. And he did so with great gusto, reading, "If you men can keep your heads when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you and make allowances for their doubting too, if you men can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, not dealing lies, or being hated and not give way to hating, yet don't look too good or talk too wise. If you men can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think but not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and meet those two impostors just the same, if you men can fulfill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds left of distant run, yours is the earth and everything in it. And what is more, you will be a man, my son." There was emotion as the pastor finished those words, and tears were coming to his eyes, and there was a moment of extended silence, which then was broken by someone in the back of the room saying, "Well, what if you can't?" The question persists. What if you can't? What if we can't master our dreams? What if we can't? Or as the fish who bobbed around on the top of the ocean in those plastic bags that I talked about earlier, saying, "Now what?" That is where the story for us begins, because our what ifs and now whats are not as important as our willingness to stand before God and say, "Here I am." The profound part of the baptism story is that it assures us that God breaks through the stuff in our lives, and wherever we are, declares us blessings upon blessings. You are my child, each and every one of us. God says, "You are my own. I am with you. I see all that you can do." And that means the world. And that means true life. Amen.